Hello and welcome to the Wilson Disease Association Copper Conscious Cookbook webinar. I'm Rhonda Rowland, the president of the Wilson Disease Association, and I'm excited that you're joining us. This is your opportunity to learn more about this guidebook with recipes for eating well with Wilson disease, and we'll be bringing it to life by having the talented and highly experienced co-authors with us today. They'll be taking your questions later in our program. A few housekeeping notes. If you have a question, please enter them at any time in the question box at the bottom of your screen. It has a question mark icon. You can also chat and share your experiences with other members of the Wilson disease community in the chat feature, also located at the bottom of the screen. If you have a technical question during the webinar, drop them into the chat and our production team will help you out. And I'd like to take this opportunity to give a shout out and thank you to our production team, Allison Hashimoto, our executive producer, who some of you met during our ELPFTD preparations, and Nicole Brown, our new operations and program manager. I'd also like to thank our sponsors who made this educational programming possible. Orphalon, Eaton Pharmaceuticals, and Ultragenics. Now, on with our webinar. When I was diagnosed with Wilson disease at the age of 21 and told it's a disorder of copper metabolism, I was shocked, not just by receiving a diagnosis of a rare genetic liver disease that I had never heard of, but by the revelation that copper is in the foods we eat. I know I'm not alone. My doctor, the one who diagnosed me, told me to avoid the five high copper foods: shellfish, chocolate, nuts, mushrooms, and liver, though I could have them once in a while, he said. That was in 1983, and today we know so much more. Living with a rare disease, there's a lot we cannot control. However, as our medical advisory committee chair, Dr. Michael Shilsky, writes in the foreword of our cookbook, food intake is one part of the care journey that patients control, and having this guide for safe and nutritious options for Wilson patients is very important. Our team felt some urgency to create this cookbook when it was brought to our attention that there are a number of copper cookbooks in the marketplace. And here, I give you a word of caution. They appear to be AI generated. It's not clear that these books have been medically reviewed or that in some cases the authors are even real. Our dedicated team of 9 included editors, authors, culinary experts, nutrition professionals, medical advisors, and patient advocates. Now, I'm pleased to introduce you to our editor-in-chief and lead author, Carolyn O'Neil. She is a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and food journalist. We met 40 years ago at CNN, where we both worked in the health unit. I reported medical news, and she reported food and nutrition news. It's been amazing to have my lifetime colleague and friend, who has supported me in my Wilson disease journey, take the lead in developing this guide. So, welcome, Carolyn.
Oh, thank you so much, Rhonda. And thank you so much for inviting me to be part of the nutrition and culinary team that works so beautifully together to create the Copper Conscious Cookbook for the Wilson Disease Association and a global audience. And I just want to say, guess what? In the book, we even have a universal conversion chart. So you don't use Fahrenheit, you use centigrade, we got you. You don't use teaspoons, you use milliliters, we got you. So we thought of everything. It is a global audience. As you'll learn on today's webinar from the expert contributors involved, this first of a kind resource in print and digital formats is much, much more than a cookbook. Although the delicious and easy to make recipes are dietitian approved and kitchen tested. It's a guidebook to eating well with Wilson disease. Thankfully, a rare disease with real solutions. Sometimes, and Rhonda, I thought about this, the significance of a project is not measured by reaching the most people, it's by reaching the people who need it the most. And surveys conducted by the Wilson Disease Association have consistently shown that patients, caregivers, and healthcare providers wanted more guidance on the dietary management of Wilson disease, how to navigate those lists and charts of the copper content. And they want easy to understand advice on grocery shopping, cooking, snacking, eating out. Well, guess what? The Copper Conscious Cookbook aims to help in all of those categories and more. If you already have a copy of the book, this webinar will help you better understand how we combine nutrition research and culinary creativity. Now, if you don't have the book yet, we hope you'll be inspired to know and perhaps relieved to know the copper conscious diet to support Wilson disease can be nutritious, delicious, and satisfying for everyone gathered around the table. And here's the barcode to order the book. Here's the cover of the book, and we'll be sharing this again at the end of the webinar. Thank you everyone for being here today to hear the behind the scenes story of the making of the Copper Conscious Cookbook. Okay, to kick things off with everybody in attendance today, we would like to hear from you with this first polling question. On a scale of 1 to 5, how confident do you feel about planning for a copper conscious diet? Number 1 is help. Obviously, you don't know much. All the way up to 5, I'm a copper conscious chef and an ace in the kitchen.
And we certainly are hoping, Carolyn, that with our new cookbook, we can get more in the 5 category. So what are we seeing here?
Well, I do like this spectrum. And number 3, right in the middle, some days it's easy, others hard, understandable. And it looks like in our results, we have a lot of people who are leaning towards confident, maybe not all the way there, but we have a lot of people in the 3 and 4 area. And it's good to know as we move forward. And with that, Rhonda, I throw it back to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Carolyn. As mentioned, we have the support of medical advisors in helping us develop the Copper Conscious Cookbook. One of them is Dr. Jason Margolesky. He is a neurologist and also director of our Wilson Disease Center of Excellence at the University of Miami. And Dr. Margolesky and I talked about the 3 M's of balancing copper and the role of diet in your overall treatment plan. Well, hello, Dr. Margolesky. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, my first question for you is, for many patients and caregivers, and I know I'm speaking for myself, the first time that we hear about copper being a part of our diet is when we get the diagnosis of Wilson disease. So, since it's new to most of us, why do we need copper?
Yeah, so copper plays a very important role in a lot of different bodily functions, including like blood cell development, brain and nerve development, immune system function, energy production. So we all need, proper amounts of copper throughout our lives to maintain those normal functions and kind of be overall healthy.
Well, when I was diagnosed back in the early 1980s, and I think many patients who were diagnosed at that time, we were all told to avoid the 5 high copper foods, which chocolate, nuts, shellfish, mushrooms, liver. And the doctors would often say, a little moderation is okay, but really your medication takes care of removing the copper. So now, 40 some years later, has that thinking changed at all?
Yeah, so now I feel that diet really complements medical treatment. And it would be wise to incorporate both to maintain kind of healthy copper balance for people with Wilson's disease. It still remains true that we should be moderate, particularly about those 5 food groups that you mentioned. And now I think about soy more, as that's kind of in a lot of products, including like artificial meats and whatnot. So that's part of it as well. Medicine still remains the primary treatment. You couldn't really treat Wilson's with diet alone, but it is a very important complement to kind of help take control over your own health.
Well, you've described the 3 M's of balancing copper. What is that, and what does that mean to patients?
Yeah, so the 3 M's are medication, monitoring, and meal planning. I also like to think of it as moderation. I have to think about my mom every time I say that. She always says everything in moderation. But that's important, I think, because there are really 3 pillars of the treatment of Wilson's disease. And number 1, medications is mentioned. It really is important to take medications regularly and as prescribed. monitoring the effects of those medications through blood tests, urine tests periodically, and at the discretion of your physician. And then the meal planning and eating copper in moderation is, very important adjunct to the treatment. And I think it's one of the aspects of treatment that the patients can really take full control of on their own and be empowered to, work towards their own health in this condition.
Well, we hear a lot as patients, obviously, about the dangers of having too much copper in our bodies. But is there the risk of going too far the other way and becoming copper deficient by going overboard with a diet such as this?
Yeah, so you can have too much and you can have too little, and being extremely restrictive in copper intake, in addition to taking medications for Wilson's, can definitely push somebody in the wrong direction. And having too low of copper has a number of symptoms that could develop, like anemia and neuropathies and spinal cord dysfunction, affecting gait and balance. So it's very important to be taking in the right amount of copper, not too much or too little.
So, what would you say is the primary message or the takeaway that you would like patients to have and caregivers to have about this new cookbook?
Sure. So I think it's important that patients take an active role in their treatment of the Wilson's disease, and the way to do that is through their dietary choices. And I hope having a resource like this book to be used for guidance in this regard can help minimize some of the stress involved and what I should be eating or not eating, and how restrictive should I be in my diet. So again, I just really hope this cookbook serves as a guide and resource for patients, to help kind of keep autonomy over your own copper balance and maintain a nutritious diet.
All right. Well, great. Well, Dr. Margolesky with our Wilson Disease Center of Excellence at the University of Miami, thank you so much for joining us and also for all the help that you gave us in putting this cookbook together. Thanks.
It was an awesome project. Thank you for having me.
I also asked Dr. Margolesky if the role of diet varies over one's lifetime. That is, when you're first diagnosed, or if you're diagnosed as a child, the first year after being diagnosed, and perhaps during pregnancy. And the answer is yes. And where patients need to take an active role in their treatment is when you do have these kinds of changes, especially. He said copper needs change over a person's life. But one key idea stays the same. Your body always needs the right amount, not too little and not too much for normal health. Think Goldilocks. As you grow, the amount you need increases, reaching a steady level in adulthood. For people being treated for Wilson disease, copper intake is usually more tightly controlled early in treatment, then relaxed a bit once levels are stable. During pregnancy, getting the right balance becomes especially important because both the mother and baby need enough copper for healthy development. Doctors may adjust medications and monitor levels closely to keep everything in the proper range. It's all about the second M, monitoring. Later in our program, I'll talk with co-author Carly Albinder, a patient and new mom, about diet during pregnancy. But for now, I will turn it back to Carolyn.
Anyway, what a perfect segue. As a registered dietitian, I'm so excited to be a part of this book. And wow, what a team of dietitians we had working on this. This is March. It happens to be National Nutrition Month. So, it's a big celebration for us to teach people how nutrition can make a difference in lives. And we've got a lot to cover, including all the attendees' questions at the very end. And we'll have a taste tour of the recipes. You've already seen some pretty tantalizing photographs of the recipes in the interview with Dr. Margolesky. But right now, I'd like you to welcome Anne Marie Rivard, registered dietitian, clinical dietitian at the Yale New Haven Hospital, which is a Wilson Disease Center of Excellence. Hello, Anne Marie, and thank you so much for all that you've done to make this book come alive. And a big shout out and a thank you to your dietitian colleague, Julia Cabuzzi, also at Yale New Haven. And after Anne Marie, we'll hear from dietitian Stacey Beer of Texas Children's Hospital on the special dietary needs in pediatrics. And Stacey will also tell us how to plan copper conscious snacks for kids and adults. Okay, Anne Marie, what do you like most about sharing the resources in this cookbook with the patients you see, the clients you see, the Wilson disease community?
Yes. Good morning, Carolyn. Thanks for having me today. So I love sharing this resource because I think as dietitians, most of the time, we are coming in the room and people say, here's the dietitian. She's going to tell me what I cannot eat. But this is something that I think is really empowering for people because it says, here's things I can eat. There's so much you can have when you're going through Wilson disease. There's foods that can easily be included in your diet, even things that we typically think of as higher in copper. And there's ways that we can show you can easily enjoy them. So it's not all about things to cut out, but ways to healthfully enjoy these foods. So I think this is a great resource to do that.
And as we've said on the cover and an introduction, the Copper Conscious Cookbook is more than a cookbook, and recipes, although they're delicious. It's a guidebook. As a registered dietitian, why do you think that's important? And I know you really help with the preamble in the book.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think a lot of times people come and they want to say, just tell me what to eat. Give me, a meal plan and tell me the recipes that I have to eat, and I'll just eat what you say. But that's not how we want people to live their life. And we know it's not what people are going to do. You're going to be going out, you're going to go to other people's houses. You want to have variety in your diet. So our role as dietitians is to really empower you to feel confident to make your own choices and to be able to make your own decisions with food choices. So that's why it's a guidebook to, yes, give you some specific examples so you can have those specific, choices that here's an idea you can try, but then to feel confident to say, I can make my own meal or I can make a good choice when I'm out at a restaurant. So it's really empowering them with those decision-making tools.
I want to, I think when we first met, you talked about how one of the first things that folks ask you about are the copper lists of copper content in foods, which can
Mhm.
be overwhelming. As we all know, copper is not listed on nutrition facts labels. It's certainly not listed even in the ingredients label. You have to be a real detective. Let's talk about the charts in the book. And we work together as a team to really identify more foods and beverages and give more clues to help folks become copper detectives. Can
Mhm.
you explain why it's not that simple to come up sometimes with the copper content, even though there's AI searches today? And there's so many variables that we found out, like even with cheeses, which dairy products are usually in the low category. And then we find out that some of the cheeses made in Europe that are beautiful are made in copper vats. So again,
Exactly.
it is incredible to think this is why I guess you shouldn't seek support on the internet. You really need to connect with the experts.
Right. Yeah. So you can spend a lot of time looking up specific milligrams or micrograms of copper, but you're going to get different information from different sources depending on where a food is grown, what soil it's grown in, how it's prepared, what specific varietal it is. So, as Rhonda has mentioned, they were told don't eat mushrooms. Well, mushrooms is a huge category. What type of mushroom is it? And when I dug into it, there's a huge difference between a shiitake mushroom and a white button mushroom. So it's just really hard to put things into a specific category and add it up per microgram. The other thing is we don't really have data that shows us that if somebody sticks to exactly 1 milligram, for example, per day, this is going to be their outcome. So it's a lot of headache for people to try and add up every single thing they eat. The resources aren't always there, they're not exact, and we don't know that it's beneficial for them. So we'd much rather arm people with general categories of about if something's low, moderate, or high, have them kind of base their diet in general as a guide with that, and definitely consult with ideally a nutrition professional to kind of further guide their choices instead of spending their time, looking up every single food they eat.
In the book, we have the copper content charts. And what I like about them is they're color coded. And
Mhm.
you've got your low copper, medium copper, high copper, and then super high. And look, I've got sticky notes. I hope that all of your cookbooks will have sticky notes soon to your favorite pages. And then one other thing that you discovered that the dried mushrooms are high.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
again, the
Right.
nuances in a category.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's so many little details that you can get tripped up on. And I am constantly updating my charts based on feedback from clients that I meet with. because they'll say, oh, I found this. What about this product? And I'll say, actually, I've never looked into that. And then I dig a bit further and I find something new and I add it to my chart. So it's ever evolving.
And it's funny, we did identify, I guess we'd call them food heroes in a way. Dried fruits are high in
Yeah.
copper, except for dried cranberries. And so
Right.
you find dried cranberries in some of the
Yeah.
recipes.
Ones
And
that
then
sneak in
one of
there.
the categories, which I love on the copper charts, is not just examples of food and serving suggestions in the medium, but a did you know? And they'll be like kind of, I wouldn't say fun facts, but I mean things that are important, like juices contain more copper than fresh fruit. Things like that, just again, to a little light reading, a little easy reading here, but that's the whole point, to make it easy. Dr. Margolesky spoke about the balance of the 3 M's, the medication, monitoring, and meal planning. So let's talk about the balancing act. This is not the low copper cookbook. This is the Copper Conscious Cookbook, okay? And in the cookbook, the recipes, we have medium content, copper content foods like avocado. And why do you think it's important that we blended in, I guess, some of these foods as well?
Because there's a lot of health benefits with those foods. If we had people following strictly a low copper diet, you are eliminating so many foods that have great fiber content to them, great vitamin and mineral content to them. You're erasing so many wholesome grains and nuts and seeds and things that we know are a healthful part of the diet. The other thing is those foods have a lot of fiber to them and something called phytates. That's a storage form of phosphorus. And those actually interfere with copper absorption. So there's data that shows us that your body doesn't absorb the copper from those foods as efficiently. So even though they're higher in copper, you probably don't absorb as much of the copper from those foods. So there's really no reason to completely avoid them. And you really get the nutritional benefit of those by including them in your diet.
Again, that's why the monitoring, Rose. So if you were a vegetarian, you'd want to be closely monitored to see maybe if some of those vegetables weren't necessarily showing up as copper in your body. We're going to keep moving on here, but we promised folks we talk about the dietary guidelines, which are new for 2025 and of course 2026. Anything in specifically that the Wilson disease community should know about any changes that are in the overall guidelines for eating healthy today?
Yeah, I mean, when you see the picture at first, it can seem like it's drastically different. There's a lot of similarities in that, there's still a big emphasis on fruits and vegetables being the base, which fits in very well with the Wilson disease diet. When you read the written guidelines, there's still a good amount of similarities to what we've always advocated. There is still an emphasis on whole grains, which matches up with what I was just talking about, including the moderate foods. There is a greater emphasis on protein. With Wilson disease and with most average Americans, you don't need an excessive amount of protein. You need the appropriate amount for your body. So consult with a nutrition professional for that. You usually can get the amount of protein you need from food-based sources, unless there's specific medical concerns or reasons why you really need additional protein. What we found with Wilson disease is most of the supplemental protein. So if you're trying to take a protein smoothie or add protein powder or protein bars, those tend to be made with either soy protein or pea protein or a whey isolate, and those tend to be higher in copper. So we do discourage clients with Wilson disease from taking supplemental protein unless consulting with a professional, because they can be quite high in copper.
Well, thank you. There's so many questions, and luckily we do have a Q&A in the end, and Anne Marie will be with us for that. And again, it just also shows you that having the Copper Conscious Cookbook, kind of doing your homework, if you will, can also enhance your time with a registered dietitian during your care with Wilson disease. Well, Anne Marie, now we're going to move on to another registered dietitian, as we told you about. I'd like to introduce in a pre-recorded interview, registered dietitian Stacey Beer, who is a clinical dietitian at the Baylor College of Medicine, Texas Children's Hospital, another Wilson Disease Center of Excellence. And hello, Stacey. Thank you so much for being a part of the Copper Conscious Cookbook webinar.
Thank you, Carolyn, for having me, and for the Wilson Disease Foundation for putting so much time and effort into a wonderful cookbook that has been published just recently.
You know, already we've talked about so many things, and now we are getting to the topic of special attention for families, for pediatric nutrition. As you know, this is more important than ever with more young people, infants, children, toddlers being diagnosed with Wilson disease. What do you find is perhaps one of the most frequently asked questions when parents first see you as a registered dietitian for help following a special diet?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a very interesting perspective. We are seeing so many more diagnoses at an early age. And I think it's really important and critical when they are diagnosed at an early age that we're really considering not being too restrictive because of how important growth and development is in these kids. And we really do not want to encourage copper deficiency because it is so critical to bone growth. In terms of what families are wanting and asking for, I think they really are wanting to make sure they can have a cohesive family with a new diagnosis. Food is such a huge part of all of our lives. And so they want to make sure that that child is included with the rest of the family.
You know, it's interesting. Every single parent, and you're a mother of two, has to deal with the picky eater or somebody who wants to do this and wants to do that. In your case, when you're counseling families, I can't imagine there's that extra stress for families who say, no, you can't have that because. How do you help parents and caregivers approach those questions from kids? Or maybe they're too small to even speak.
Well, I think it's really amazing what this cookbook and guidebook is really going to provide to these families, giving them the ability to have substitutions that are practical. For example, some kids who maybe are diagnosed at a younger age and are very sad about inability to have chocolate, for example, introducing carob chips early on or using the recipes that are provided in the cookbook to make a cookie that includes a carob chip or a muffin that includes a carob chip. I think that is kind of a good example of a substitute that can make those kids feel included without having to feel too restricted.
You know, and grocery shopping, of course, is a family event often, and sometimes that responsibility falls into different members of the family. How do you think the cookbook really helps with planning, meal planning?
Yeah, I think it really opens up some recipes and ideas for families in order to make sure that the patient and the family is being included, but also by dividing it into categories of things of low, medium, and high foods. It really allows the family to focus on those low foods when they are grocery shopping based on categories. So when you are shopping at the grocery store, you do have that opportunity to pick the lower items on a regular basis.
Uh, can you give us some examples of successes maybe with families in terms of where they come in and they're just so stressed out and they think, oh my gosh, this is going to be really, really hard. It's hard enough being a parent. Kind of help us see how a registered dietitian support can really help.
And I think it's just normalizing meal times. I think that's really the big thing for families. Another thing that's super helpful to families is for them to do actually a few days of a dietary recall and really see how many items within their normal daily routine really do contain copper because many times there's not a ton of them. And if there is one or two items as a registered dietitian, when you do have that opportunity to meet one-on-one with those families, you can be an assistance to them to provide those substitute items. So I think the initial reaction is feeling overwhelmed, but I think by being able to speak with a registered dietitian, especially at a center of excellence, or even being able to refer families to this cookbook in the future, I think is really going to be amazing for these families to kind of be at ease that this is going to be okay, and they will be able to get through this.
All right. Now, everybody loves snacks. Okay. And we address that in the Copper Conscious Cookbook, of course. And thank you for your help on that chapter. The Copper Conscious Snack Guide is included in the cookbook. And that includes some examples of things like what could be every day, because, right, you're picking from the low copper content, and then moderate. Let's just jump to how much copper you should ideally have in a snack and why moderate? Why is that important to add a little bit of leeway there in snacking?
So I think one thing that we really need to keep an eye on is we do not want patients to become too copper deficient. So I think in the early stages when you are being diagnosed, starting various types of medications or treatment, many times we are a little bit stricter. But at the same time, if you are being treated to remove copper from your body, you want to make sure you're still getting some within your diet. So the majority of snacks should really have less than 0.15 milligrams of copper per serving. And when it comes to the moderate things, we really shouldn't exceed about 0.3 milligrams per serving of a snack. It's really those things that people are scared of eating, like peanut butter, hummus, and avocado, pumpkin seeds, for example, that really in the appropriate portion sizes and occasionally, I definitely think they should be able to be included. And so in my mind, I call them, we call them moderate in our book, but I call them to some of my patients are sometimes foods. And so I really try to make those types of things in the moderate category, not completely foreign to these families, but really something that they can enjoy.
Well, thank you so much. And another page in the book, folks, is a mix and match snack chart. So you can pick something from the very important, as I learned from Stacey, for that perfect snack, something perhaps some fruit and vegetables, some from a carbohydrate and some from protein. Again, having a balance, not just a snack, it really is giving good nutrition. Thank you so much, Stacey. Can't wait to hear what you offer us up next in the world of kids and families, and of course, snacking.
Thank you, Carolyn.
And thank you, Stacey. Wow, the snacks sound absolutely great. And you know what? Now we're getting into the recipe portion, of course, of our webinar, and very excited about an interview with registered dietitian Liz Weiss, who used her nutrition know-how and culinary talents to develop delicious recipes that meet the Copper Conscious guidelines. Now, two of my favorite recipes in the book are chicken and broccoli piccata with lemon caper sauce, and a pork tenderloin with a Dijon gravy. And again, not too high in salt. We use flavor from other healthy areas. Liz is such a master in the kitchen. And it's not an easy task, obviously, to be a good cook and also follow Copper Conscious guidelines. But Liz made the recipes easy and certainly easy to love. Okay, well, Liz, welcome to the webinar. And I
Thank
just have
you.
one thing to say, let's get cooking, because we're going to talk about actually one of the pages in the cookbook, which is an introduction to the recipes section. We're all so excited about the recipes. And thank you very much for not only developing the recipes with our team, but testing them. And so Liz Weiss, as a registered dietitian and certainly a cookbook expert and a recipe expert, what goes into recipe testing? Why is it so important?
Oh my gosh, there is so much that goes into it. We have to come up with the ideas to begin with. What will resonate with the Wilson disease community? What recipes are going to fall into that healthy and delicious copper conscious realm, if you will? Are these recipes easy? Are they made with ingredients that are easy to find? Is the recipe flexible? Because you know what? A recipe is a template, and we all like to build in flexibility. We all have different tastes. So much goes into just coming up with the ideas. Then you test. Of course, you grocery shop, you test, you do dishes, you retest, you do dishes. So there's a lot that goes on. And I am very particular, Carolyn. So if it says dice, cut the bell pepper into half-inch dice, I have my ruler, I'm not lying, and I measure that half-inch dice.
Why is this so important? We all take recipes, I would say, kind of for granted, thinking, oh, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You actually had a recipe in mind, let's say a lot of times, but when you tested it, you realized, uh-oh, I need a little more of this, a little less of that. Kind of take us behind the scenes.
Oh, yeah. So recipes take time and nuance. So, for example, let's see, I have a list here of there's so many great recipes. Okay, so we have a carob and chocolate chip cranberry cookie. And not chocolate chip as in regular chips, but carob chips. So carob chips, dry cranberries. So I'm making that recipe and it might come out a little bit dry. And I'm like, what can I do to change this up? Or I'm like, gee, it's just not quite sweet enough. I don't want it to be so sweet. We are registered dietitians. We want our recipes to bring some health to the table and great flavor, but we don't want to go overboard. So it's tweaking. And when you're baking, you got to just keep making it over and over again until it comes out just right.
And it costs money to buy ingredients. It costs time to put a recipe together. It costs a little bit of emotional, like investment to serve it to your
Yes.
family and friends. So this is another reason we are so happy that you've tested these recipes. They're not only dietitian approved, they're kitchen tested. And then, hello, real life. It may be a recipe for 4, but you've got 6 people, or it's a recipe for 6 and there's just 2 of you.
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit about how you plan for flexibility.
Right. So recipes are really a lesson in math, and I'm not very good at math, which is a good thing for you guys making these recipes because I keep things really simple and I make the math easy. So if the recipe, let's say you want to make the cauliflower power salad, and there's only two of you and not four of you, just divide by two. I mean, it is that simple. Or you want to make that cauliflower power salad, but you went to the store and broccoli was on sale, and you're like, oh, I'm going to get broccoli. I'm going to make it with broccoli instead. It'll work. So there's flexibility. And then there's the math where you can double it, just multiply by two, or you can cut it in half, divide by two.
That is fantastic. And, back to the flavors of things, and you're mentioning some recipes, which is that they're so delicious and nutritious because registered dietitians have been involved in this. Of course, we're looking at optimal nutrition with, the copper limitations involved. So as you were developing the recipes, Liz, what were you thinking of in terms of just overall good nutrition?
Sure. I'm thinking fiber always, Carolyn, because most Americans don't consume enough fiber, and fiber has so many health benefits. It feeds the healthy bacteria that live in our gut. That's the microbiome. So many health benefits to that. It helps to keep us full and satisfied so we don't tend to overeat if we have enough fiber. It helps to reduce our risk of heart disease and certain cancers. So we want more fiber, which means more fruits and veggies, whole grains, which of course, on a copper conscious diet, you're going to use more all-purpose white flour versus whole wheat, but we use some recipes with a little whole wheat mixed in. So I'm thinking fiber, I'm thinking healthy fats. We don't want to go overboard on saturated fat because that can raise heart disease risk. So I'm using canola oil and some other vegetable oils in the recipes to balance that out instead of like stick upon stick of butter. So fiber, we want to keep those fats healthy. We also want good quality protein because protein keeps us strong and satisfied, and it's so important for good health. So it's a balancing act. I'm not just going to say, here's a piece of chicken. I'm going to say, here's some chicken with broccoli or with cauliflower or with green beans or, some other veggie that really complements that dish.
The apple celery chicken salad is one of my favorites, which is 2 copper. Now, of course, when you are following the copper conscious diet lifestyle, you want to limit copper. But what we've learned from the registered dietitians at the Wilson Disease Centers of Excellence is it's okay to mix in some foods that are medium, not just all the low copper, but medium. Talk us through that a little bit in the recipe development. I guess it would be the frequency of consumption, how much is there?
Right.
We could use avocado, right? We can use some of the
Yeah.
things that are actually fall in the medium category.
Right. So I'm a big fan, as an example, of black beans and other canned beans. And we know that's a medium copper food. So is it okay to consume them? Of course it is. So in one of our recipes for a breakfast burrito, we add some black beans to that. We're not adding cup upon cup. We're adding a moderate amount of that moderate food. So yes, you can keep black beans and other beans in your pantry. Another recipe, let's see. Oh, fish tacos. I'm a huge fish taco fan. Love that recipe, but boy, am I an avocado fan, a medium food. So you and I had gone back and forth. I remember during recipe development time period of can we use avocado? Can't we use avocado? How should we use avocado? Yes. So we've got an avocado in that recipe for that serving of 4. So you're dividing that avocado by 4. You're adding some beautiful luscious slices, and you get that avocado. You're not going to eat it every day, all day, but yes, adding some of those moderate foods to really enhance the flavor and the versatility and the yumminess of those recipes. It's fine to do so.
Well, Liz, thank you so much. And also a little quick tip to everybody listening. Do not forget to read the head notes or the little paragraph just underneath the recipe title, because within that head note are not only maybe some tips and tricks about success and flexibility, but also some teachable moments about copper conscious cooking. Thank you so much, Liz.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Well, I don't know about you, but that sure made me hungry looking at all those beautiful recipes. And you see what I mean? You don't just like come up with a recipe off the bat and say, write it on the back of an envelope. This is the art and science of recipe writing. We'd also like to send a big thank you, a big shout out to managing editor Mona Dolgov. She was behind the production of this cookbook from cover to cover, page to page. I kid you not, word to word, photo to photo. Thank you, Mona. And speaking of start to finish on the project. Please welcome Carly Albinder, a Wilson disease patient and the Education and Support Director for the Wilson Disease Association. And now your quote on the back of the book, I absolutely love. It says it all. It's more than a cookbook, it's peace of mind. Well, Carly, can you believe it? We did it. The cookbook is a reality. What do you think?
I'm so excited. This is something I was dreaming about the moment I was diagnosed, and I just can't believe it's real and it's here. Oh, can't see it.
You know, you get so many questions from the community, you know, as the education support director. How do you think the cookbook really addresses a lot of these FAQs, if you will?
I think it's the only real information out there, and that's why it's so important. There's so much contradicting information on the internet. Like when I was first diagnosed, I was looking on Reddit, on Facebook, I was messaging people with their tips of eating because eating is part of daily life. So I really think that it's just so helpful to everyone of all ages, of all stages of diagnosis.
And during your journey, you've really become quite the skilled diet detective, Carly. I know when you were helping us work on the book, determining copper content of foods and drinks. Any tips you could share about using the copper charts in the book and why you really believe people shouldn't be too worried about every little microgram, all the nitty gritty?
I think it's so important to refer to the book for low, medium, and high because if you get so bogged down on every little ingredient, it can become so restrictive and so overwhelming. And that's what happened to me in the beginning. And then I felt like I couldn't eat anything. I was walking into a grocery store and like staring at vegetables and crying because I didn't know what I could eat. So I think it's just so helpful when you go out to dinner to see, okay, well, I shouldn't have shellfish or I shouldn't have almond flour, but can I ask about other ingredients in the dishes?
Okay, real life, modern life. You know that eating out is not a special occasion anymore. It really is a part of everybody's lifestyle. And we do have a section in the book with some guidance on dining out. And what I love is that, by the way, in restaurants now, everybody has special requests. It's not just, you know, of course, you're not going to say, hey, can you tell me, does this have copper in it? You know, they're not going to know. But don't feel like you are unusual for asking about more questions, right? What, any tips for dining out?
Definitely. So the biggest thing is when you say, "Oh, can you remove this or that ingredient?" and the waiter is like, "Oh, well, is it an allergy?" And in the beginning, I was like, "Well, no, but yes, how do I explain this?" So I think just saying, "I don't want something" is just so simple and easy. So many people don't like certain foods. And then a big thing is asking like if something's made with clam juice or different shellfish, different high copper ingredients is really what I focus on when I'm out to dinner, and not obsessing over the little ingredients, and especially medium and low copper.
And another actually cool thing, because so many people do have food intolerances or allergens today, often behind the scenes in the kitchens, they have things mise en place or the ingredients are separated out. So if you say, I don't want nuts on that, it's easier for them to do that today because obviously they've got that prepared for the folks with who might happen to have a nut allergy. So again, not as hard as it used to be, thanks to all the other people making special requests. You know, Carly, um, could this cookbook have been bigger? Yes. Could we have had more recipes? Of course. We wanted to get it done, you know, in a timely manner and also at an affordable cost. So there are lots of recipes. It could have been thicker, but stay tuned, folks, because aren't you looking forward to hearing back from the community about how they're making the recipes and maybe wanting more?
Yeah, definitely. I already get feedback in the support groups about how good the recipes are, and when more recipes are going to be developed. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, and so we would love to see as you're making the recipes, folks, to share those photos and tips, and just know if you're going to make a recipe. Oh, another good tip: look at the recipes in the book and see the format, how they're written. That really is the art and the science. So if you're going to write a recipe down, kind of take a look, see at how ingredients are listed and how the directions are also conveyed. Now, Carly, thank you so much. You stay right there. And speaking of the community, why don't we find out how much our webinar has already helped those listening today? So this is the same question from the beginning, and we will wait for results. On a scale of 1 to 5, how confident do you feel about planning for a copper conscious diet? And of course, 5 means you feel super confident. 1, you're not really that confident. And so education is so important, isn't it, Carly? I mean, for newly diagnosed to those that have been living with Wilson disease, right?
Especially because the dietary guidelines kind of change over time. So it's really important to stay up to date on all the current information.
Well, we'll be keeping an eye out and see how we're doing with educating the Wilson disease community. Obviously, the folks on this webinar are going to be the smartest of the bunch. You know, we've covered so much and it's been great. And now it's time for your questions. So let's bring back Rhonda Rowland. Oh, there's the results, Carly. Look, okay, we're doing pretty. We've got a lot more in the 5 column. We've got more confidence in number 5, which means you feel good about it. I'm happy to hear that. And you'll feel even better after you have the cookbook, okay? So we'd like to bring back Rhonda Rowland, president of the Wilson Disease Association, to moderate our Q&A. And I know that you already have a lot of questions in the queue, Rhonda. Also joining us in a few moments is going to be Anne Marie Rivard for your nutrition questions. There she is. And I'll stick around for cookbook and recipe questions.
All right. Well, ladies, you're doing a fabulous job. I learn something every time that I hear from all of you. And a reminder to those who have joined us for the webinar, if you have questions, please type them into the question box on the bottom of your screen. And I am going to start the Q&A off with a question for Carly. As I had mentioned earlier in the program, during pregnancy, Dr. Margolesky from our Wilson Disease Center of Excellence at the University of Miami mentioned that it's important to have frequent monitoring, you know, the second of the 3 M's. So during your pregnancy, Carly, and to contrast it to mine, I was pregnant in 1996. There was no information about how to adjust my diet during my pregnancy. Now, for you as a new mom, what was your experience?
Yeah, so I was told to not change anything with my medication during my pregnancy, and frequent monitoring. I think it was every 2 months, getting my liver enzymes checked and copper urine, 24-hour urine. And my urine actually came back a little bit deficient. So I was told by my doctor I can increase my copper intake, which was really exciting. And it was really helpful to have the cookbook during this time because I was able to see what high copper foods I can incorporate into my diet for a special short time. But obviously, being careful about that with the frequent monitoring and making sure that I was staying on track.
And Carly, I think it's also important for us to point out once again that it's good in our community for us to share our experiences with others, but always get the medical advice from your doctor. It's fine to go and say, hey, I heard another patient did this or that, but always seek the advice of your physician. So I did see a question pop up here that I'd like to have Carolyn answer that was talking about copper in water. And I know that you, during the development of the cookbook, you looked into some of that. So what did you find out?
Well, we have a section in the cookbook called Think About Your Drink, and we have information on everything from looking at your water, and there's also information, of course, on the Wilson Disease Association website about that, and about being careful about certain beverages, the soy-based drinks, fortified drinks, you don't know what they're fortified with, and then cheers to mocktails. We even have a little section on having your water tested, and then, of course, enjoying delicious non-alcoholic drinks, too, as many Wilson disease patients are limiting alcohol. So it's in the book.
Okay. And just a reminder to those of you are putting some of your questions in the chat. We might miss those, so be sure to put them in the question box on the bottom of your screen. It's slightly to the right. But I'd like to ask Anne Marie a question from Alan. And I love this because Alan is in his 20s, and I love that he is taking control over his diet and the management of his Wilson disease. And he says, it's a great guidebook, a valuable and much needed resource. Thanks so much for producing My question, he said he may have missed it, but beef in its many forms isn't really listed. For instance, where do hamburgers and other beef products fall on the copper continuum?
Yeah, so with red meat and a little bit of the higher fat meat, they tend to be a little more moderate. And it's going to vary based on the percent fat. The leaner of the red meats actually tends to be a slight bit higher. It's not a huge difference. We know that the leaner of the beefs is better from a heart perspective. But really, the lowest in copper is going to be your white meat. So, like a chicken breast or a turkey breast. Or a white fish is really what's most recommended. So that should be the base of your diet, but perfectly reasonable to alternate and to have swapped out with, a lean hamburger or beef. But that's what we consider moderate.
And Anne Marie, while you have the floor, I have a question here from Mom Lee about her son. And she said her kiddo is having trouble gaining weight and he eats all the time when he can. That's because of how we have to manage it around our medications. And she wanted to introduce protein to help with this, but based on what has been said, protein bars and powders are out. Aside from actual meats and yogurts, etc., is there a supplement that would be helpful with weight gain? And along the same lines, vitamins. She feels like she can read that you can take some of the vitamins around the same time as taking medications. There's a lot for moms to manage with their children.
Definitely. Yeah. So definitely trying to consult with a dietitian where you can. Stacey is definitely the expert on that. But in terms of the weight gain, you really just need to focus on increasing calories overall. So protein, is great when somebody has trouble with healing or maybe had surgery or has a wound problem. But in terms of just overall gaining weight, you don't need excessive protein. You really just need to focus on calories, boosting the overall energy intake. And one of the best ways to do that is with a little bit of extra fat in the diet, because that does not contain a lot of copper. And for a short period of time for a kiddo, it's not going to be detrimental to have a little extra fat to start with. So making sure you're getting like a whole milk. When you do milk or a whole milk yogurt, you can use a little extra olive oil when doing cooking, is a good idea. And then there is some shakes out there that are just milk-based shakes. So something like the Fairlife shakes, you don't need the super high protein ones, just like the baseline ones. Those are all just milk-based, so you could do a shake like that. But just finding ways to add extra calories in. So consulting with a dietitian to get a higher calorie diet, but I wouldn't use a protein supplement for that.
Okay, thank you, Anne Marie. And again, another shout out for our Wilson Disease Center of Excellences around the country and also abroad, where we have registered dietitians who can really help with all of this. And speaking of an international audience, we are international. And so we have had the question if we're going to perhaps add on to the cookbook with more, to reach these other cultures. So Carolyn, I'd like you to just touch on that and then Carly pick it up, because when you were pregnant, you were traveling in Africa where the foods are very different. So you can maybe lend some insight on how you manage that.
Well, Rhonda, I just also want to follow up on the water questions. We have a lot of good ones, but that means people care. And in the book, someone asks about drinking water away from home, okay, which kind of dips into travel. And in the book, we do share information that tap water in places you don't know, you kind of have to avoid it. But the good news is drinking unknown tap water for a short period of time is okay if no other option is available, obviously water being key. And back to the international focus, even in the cookbook, I think a lot of the recipes that we chose different flavors, maybe sort of Latin flavors and some more flavors like Asian flavors, different kinds of fruits and vegetables. Of course, there's a world of flavors out there to enjoy and ingredients. Somebody I noticed asked about scallops. We found out that scallops is actually in the low category. So there's so much good news to discover in the book. And we will continue as we work with the Wilson Disease Association community to come up with more and more recipes to that appeal to everybody.
And Carolyn, can I
Carly,
just, sorry,
you're-
Carolyn, can I jump in on that? A lot of the commercial carbon-based filters are quite effective at removing copper. So if you are, staying somewhere for a week or two, you can use something like one of those pitchers to filter your water for a short period of time.
And Carly, on traveling to Africa while pregnant
Yeah.
and choosing foods, is there quickly any kind of tip you can give on how to incorporate when foods are very different?
Yeah, so I just made sure that I was getting like a yogurt in the morning and stayed away from granola with different additives. And I didn't really go into the nitty-gritty of why I couldn't eat certain things, especially in a different culture. I didn't want to offend. So I was just really careful about eating more simple. And I think that was the biggest tip.
Okay, and we have time for one more question. I see in the question box some questions are answered in the cookbook. So if you don't have it yet, we hope you will pick it up. And this last one for Anne Marie, can you define sometimes for those foods? Once a week, once a month?
Yeah, and that can be challenging because it'll differ from person to person, again, based on what kind of phase you are in your treatment course. So for somebody who's maybe just starting out or maybe changing medications or maybe kind of having a spike in their levels and trying to get better control, what I would say for the high copper foods, that sometimes, might be once or twice a week. For somebody who has really good control and is stable, they could definitely have one of the higher copper foods once a week, and that's totally fine, or maybe even a couple times a week. There are certain foods that we say to really limit and to try to avoid, which would be like the lobster, the liver, some of the other really high shellfish, because those are absorbed very efficiently. But the moderate copper foods, those can be enjoyed daily by almost everybody, because as long as they're eaten in reasonable portion sizes, they're not going to add up to be considerably high, and they're not absorbed extremely efficiently. So that's why it's best to try and consult with somebody to see what's best for you.
Okay. All right. Well, again, we are coming on just about the end here. And so I would like to first say goodbye and thank you to Anne Marie Rivard, registered dietitian nutritionist with our Yale Wilson Disease Center of Excellence, and also to Carly Albinder, who, if you are not part of our virtual support groups, she runs 4 of them a year, peer-to-peer support groups. She's on our board, a new mom. So we thank you so much for your insights, and of course, being the driver to really get this cookbook done. So thank you, Carly. So Carolyn, hang on with me because I know you have one last polling question. But again, Anne Marie and Carly, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Carolyn, what is that last polling
Well,
question?
we did our polling questions, Rhonda. We did a before and after to see how people were, doing, and we actually saw some increase. But when you looked at the Q&A again in my little wrap up, there were so many good questions. And don't worry, your questions are valued and you are being listened to. I can't wait to help the team go through them. And something as really specific as shiitake mushrooms, all the way how much copper should I have a day, which is super basic. So go to your Wilson Disease Association website for that kind of stuff. It's all there. And Rhonda, thank you very much. And congratulations again as president of coming up with this incredible resource for the community.
Well, Carolyn, as you know, we could not have done it without you. So thank you for all you've done to serve our Wilson disease community and helping to develop these important resources. So Carolyn, again, great job. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rhonda.
If you haven't bought your copy yet of the Copper Conscious Cookbook, we hope you will. It's available on Amazon for $12.99 and the Kindle version is $7.99. The QR code is on your screen and it will take you to the Wilson Disease Association website where you'll find the link to the cookbook on Amazon. Please write us a review, or at least we hope you'll give us 5 stars. That will help boost us in the Amazon rankings, which will help raise awareness for Wilson disease and get this highly credible source into the hands of Wilson disease patients, caregivers, and those who treat and care for our patient community. So we really need to get up to like 30 reviews. So please, please help us out. And again, I just want to thank everyone for joining us, for answering our survey questions, asking your questions. And thanks again to our team members who contributed to this webinar, Carolyn O'Neil, Dr. Jason Margolesky, Anne-Marie Rivard, Stacey Beer, Liz Weiss, and Carly Albinder. And thanks again to our generous sponsors, Eaton Pharmaceuticals, Orphalon, and Ultragenics. Remember, eating well with Wilson disease is possible, and it can be full of comfort, fun, and flavor.